as alignment. Marcus Aurelius said, "The nearer a man comes to a calm mind, the closer he is to strength." And calm doesn't come in crowded rooms filled with ego and expectation. It comes when you choose peace over popularity, stillness over applause, self-trust over validation. This isn't about arrogance, it's about responsibility. When you're building something that matters, your business, your purpose, your mind, you can't afford to carry everyone with you. Some people are heavy in the worst way, not because they're bad, but because they're not built for the weight you're meant to lift. And every time you lower your standards to keep someone comfortable, you lower your altitude. You trade clarity for closeness. And closeness, when it comes with noise, eventually clouds everything you once saw so clearly. People will misunderstand this. They'll call it selfish, cold, detached. Let them. Because the truth is, the people who matter will understand that boundaries aren't walls. They're filters. Filters that keep your mind clear, your mission focused, and your heart safe from unnecessary chaos. And the ones who don't understand, they were never with you to begin with. They were just nearby. There's a difference. The strange thing is, as the circle tightens, your vision sharpens. You stop seeking advice from every direction. You start listening to the few who actually understand. And even then, you treat every opinion as a suggestion, not a command. You learn to carry your own compass. Because once you've spent enough time listening to yourself in solitude, the noise of others starts to sound like static. Not evil, not threatening, just irrelevant. Power doesn't require a spotlight. It doesn't need a crowd chanting your name. It lives in the person who can sit alone with their decisions and not flinch, who can lose approval and not panic, who can walk away from praise and not look back for confirmation. That's real power, the kind that doesn't sway with popularity or crumble under pressure. And the people who reach this place, they're rarely loud. They're not explaining themselves. They're not checking optics. They're just doing the work, quietly, consistently, unbothered. You begin to realize the climb was never about being seen. It was about seeing clearly. And the higher you go, the less you need, the less you speak, the more you observe, the more you understand that true power isn't having influence over others. It's not needing it. It's being okay with not being understood, with being misread, with being alone, not as a punishment, but as a form of protection. And yet even here, solitude isn't emptiness. It's presence. Presence with your thoughts, your values, your direction. You see things as they are, not as others try to paint them. You don't get distracted by flattery or shaken by criticism. You listen, but you don't absorb everything. You engage, but you don't entangle. And that's the quiet discipline most people never reach, not because they can't, but because they won't let go of the comfort that comes with being surrounded. What most people call loneliness, the powerful call alignment. And in that alignment, everything unnecessary falls away. Drama, distractions, performative support. You trade noise for peace, attention for clarity. You stop being available to everyone and start being deeply present for the few things that actually matter. And when you live that way long enough, you stop missing the crowd. You stop fearing the silence. You begin to see solitude not as something to escape, but as the very space where you become unshakable. So yes, power filters, not with cruelty, with clarity. It separates what's essential from what's convenient, what strengthens you from what distracts you, what's real from what's performative. It's not about walking away from people. It's about walking toward your truth and accepting that most won't follow you there. And in the rare moments when someone does, you'll know they belong. Not because they pushed to stay close, but because they chose the same silence, the same discipline, the same path. You won't need to explain it. You'll just know. That's the paradox of power. It doesn't grow louder, it grows cleaner, simpler, sharper, and the only way to reach it is to filter out what never belonged in the first place. Connection is a beautiful thing until you begin to understand what it truly costs. We grow up believing that to be loved, to be trusted, to be accepted, we must open ourselves up, show our emotions, reveal our stories, let others in. And at first, that seems like strength. Vulnerability feels noble, honest, human. But as you step into positions of influence, something shifts. You begin to see how every shared weakness can become a weapon. Every revealed doubt becomes someone else's leverage. What once made you relatable now makes you exposed. And suddenly, being seen doesn't feel safe anymore. It feels like risk. A risk you can't afford to take if you're carrying the weight of something bigger than yourself. It doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop displaying. Because in the eyes of others, especially those watching from the outside, your emotions aren't just expressions, they're signals. And signals, when read by the wrong person, invite challenges. Some will test your patience just to watch you crack. Others will comfort you while quietly recalibrating how they perceive your strength. Vulnerability becomes a performance review. And even when people say, "I want honesty," what they often mean is, "Give me your struggle, but only if it makes me feel inspired, not uncomfortable." That's not acceptance. That's conditional tolerance. And leaders can't build from that. So you begin to detach, not out of pride or ego, but out of necessity, because there are things you carry now that no one else understands. Decisions that would crush someone if they knew the full weight of them. Fears you can't name because to name them would shake the confidence of everyone watching. The further you move into your purpose, the more your silence becomes your shield. Not because you're trying to hide, but because explaining yourself is now a liability. And power, real power, thrives in controlled expression, not emotional transparency. This isn't to say emotion has no place, quite the opposite. Emotion, when mastered, becomes vision. It becomes conviction. But when unleashed without restraint, it creates chaos. Imagine a storm with no structure, just noise, wind, destruction. That's what uncontained emotion looks like in power. It doesn't comfort, it confuses. And confusion is the first crack in your foundation. Becoming who you truly are often requires walking through silence, alone. It requires letting go of the need to be constantly understood, even by those closest to you. Because when you are tasked with carrying vision, clarity must come before closeness. And sometimes the very people you long to connect with are not capable of holding the full depth of your truth without misinterpreting it. You begin to see relationships differently, not with suspicion, but with precision. You stop spilling everything to feel less alone. You learn that connection is sacred, not casual. That some emotions are meant to be transmuted internally, not shared publicly. And the fewer people who have access to your internal world, the more protected your purpose becomes. Not everyone should know what keeps you up at night. Not everyone should be invited into the furnace where your strength is forged. This doesn't make you cold. It makes you clear. There is a difference. Coldness is indifference. Clarity is responsibility. And when you operate from clarity, you begin to notice how often people equate closeness with entitlement. They want access, but not accountability. They want presence, but not pressure. And the moment you withhold something, your time, your thoughts, your feelings, they claim you've changed, that you've become distant. But in truth, you've just become aware. That awareness reshapes how you communicate. You speak less, but with more weight. You listen more, but absorb less. You offer guidance, but rarely seek validation, because validation, when it becomes a need, becomes your leash. and the powerful cannot afford to be leashed, not by praise, not by criticism, and especially not by emotional dependency. You will still feel deeply. You'll still wrestle with doubt. You'll still crave intimacy, but you'll start choosing solitude over superficial closeness. Not because you want to suffer alone, but because you understand that most people aren't asking to help carry your burden. They're asking to be entertained by it. That sounds harsh, but it's true. When you lead, people become curious. They want to peek behind the curtain. They want to know the story, the struggle, the raw truth. But very few are prepared to sit with that truth without distorting it to fit their own narrative. And so, you stop offering it freely. You start protecting your peace like it's oxygen. Because it is. Without peace, your decisions become reactive. Your leadership becomes emotional. Your focus dissolves. And in that blur, you become predictable. Predictability, when you are in a position of influence, is dangerous. It gives people a map to your mind, and those maps don't always end up in hands. You learn to be present without being porous, to show up without showing all, to speak with warmth, but not with weakness. This is not performance, it's preservation. Preservation of purpose, preservation of clarity, preservation of the self you've worked so hard to understand and build. You begin to see that connection doesn't have to mean exposure. It can be built through presence, consistency, depth, not constant emotional display. You don't close yourself off entirely. You become selective, intentional. You choose to connect through purpose, not just through pain. You connect through shared values, not shared wounds. And in doing so, the connections you do build become stronger, not louder, stronger, because they're not built on dependency, they're built on respect. Seneca wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor." And this applies not just to possessions, but to relationships. Craving constant closeness, constant reassurance, constant understanding, that's emotional poverty. Real strength is in the one who can sit in the unknown, in the misunderstood, and still remain steady. That steadiness doesn't mean you're unaffected. It means you're in control of how you express what you feel. The more influence you hold, the more important that control becomes, because people don't just watch what you say, they study how you carry yourself. Every word is measured, every reaction is interpreted, and in that spotlight, emotion isn't just a feeling, it's a signal. One you must learn to send with care, or not at all. So yes, connection requires vulnerability, but power demands a form of detachment. Not detachment from humanity, but from the impulse to be emotionally accessible to everyone, all the time. It's learning when to speak and when to hold back, when to share and when to remain silent, when to connect and when to protect. And as you walk this path, it gets quieter. The circle gets smaller, the conversations get deeper, and the responsibility gets heavier. But within that stillness, something profound happens. You stop reaching outward for safety. You start building it inward. And the more you do that, the less you need from the world around you. That's the paradox no one tells you. The more you detach from needing connection, the more intentional your connections become. The less you rely on being seen, the more you see clearly. And the less you give your emotions away freely, the more power they carry when you choose to speak. That's not coldness, that's maturity, that's clarity. That's the kind of power that doesn't shout. It simply stands, still, focused, untouchable. There's this image we carry when we hear the word fortress, stone walls, gates that never open, high towers and a moat between us and the world. But that's just architecture. The real fortress isn't made of stone or steel. It's made of intention, of boundaries no one sees but everyone feels. It's not a place you retreat to. It's something you carry with you, a state of mind that can't be breached by gossip, by judgment, or by the shifting winds of someone else's opinion. The strongest fortress is one that doesn't isolate you from life. It roots you so deeply in your own self that nothing outside of you holds the power to knock you off balance. And here's the truth most people miss. It's not about shutting people out. It's about not letting anything in that doesn't align with your values, your peace, your focus. The fortress isn't there to keep the world away. It's there to keep you whole. In a world that pulls you in 100 different directions, where expectations, comparisons, and distractions shout for your attention, building this inner fortress is not a luxury, it's survival. If you don't stand guard over your mind, someone else will take control of it. And they won't do it with force. They'll do it with flattery, with guilt, with manipulation dressed as concern. That's how breaches happen, not with an attack, but with an invitation. And once the wrong person steps into your inner world, it doesn't take long before confusion follows. You start questioning your instincts. You hesitate when you used to move with clarity. You seek permission where you once stood firm. That's the danger of a weak foundation. It doesn't break all at once. It crumbles slowly, quietly, until one day you look around and realize you're no longer living from your values, but reacting to someone else's noise. The fortress mindset changes that. You stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop defending your peace to those who benefit from your chaos. And most importantly, you stop letting your mood be dictated by external validation or criticism. You become sovereign, grounded, still. That's the paradox of strength. It looks like silence from the outside, but on the inside, it's a roaring fire that says, I know who I am, and I don't need you to agree with it. This isn't coldness, it's clarity. And clarity, once cultivated, becomes a shield. A soft, immovable boundary that doesn't need to push or pull. It simply is. Some will call it distance. Others might say you've changed. Let them. Because the moment your stability becomes uncomfortable for others, you've just revealed who was invested in your confusion. Carl Jung once said, "The foundation of all mental illness is the unwillingness to experience legitimate suffering." That's what happens when you build no fortress. You suffer every time someone disapproves, every time you feel misunderstood, every time someone doesn't see your worth. But when you build this fortress, you accept a new kind of suffering, the kind that comes from restraint, from choosing to stay quiet when you could lash out, from letting people misinterpret you rather than wasting your energy trying to be understood. And over time, that suffering transforms into strength. You learn to observe instead of react, to sit in discomfort without rushing to fix it, to recognize that most situations don't need your energy, they need your stillness. That's the power of a fortified mind. It doesn't resist the world, it outlasts it. Like a mountain that doesn't tremble at every storm. It doesn't mean you're unfeeling. It means your emotions aren't running the show. It means you've built something steadier beneath the surface, something that no rumor, no betrayal, no fleeting praise can touch. This inner stillness becomes the way you navigate everything. Conflict doesn't feel like chaos. It becomes information. Criticism doesn't sting. It becomes insight or noise, and you learn to tell the difference. Praise doesn't intoxicate. It simply passes through. And betrayal? Betrayal no longer breaks you because you're not living in a way that relies on others to hold you together. That's what makes you untouchable, not because nothing happens to you, but because nothing outside of you decides who you are. But don't mistake this for isolation. This kind of strength invites connection, but only the kind that respects your boundaries. It allows for love, but not at the cost of self-abandonment. It opens the door, but it does not remove the threshold. People can walk with you, but not through you. And the ones who understand that, they'll stay. The rest will leave, and you'll learn not to chase. Because peace doesn't come from the presence of people. It comes from the absence of noise. And noise comes in many forms: gossip, doubt, pressure to perform, pressure to explain, pressure to shrink. That's why this mindset matters. It doesn't just protect your peace, it preserves your purpose. And purpose without boundaries dissolves into performance. You forget why you started. You start making decisions from fear, from fatigue, from the need to prove something. That's what happens when the fortress is weak. You become reactive. But when the walls are strong, you become strategic, intentional, rooted. Epictetus said, "No person is free who is not master of themselves." That mastery begins in the mind, in the discipline to hold your ground when the world pushes, in the wisdom to say no, not with anger, but with certainty, in the courage to walk away from anything that tempts you to betray your own integrity. That is the essence of the fortress. It doesn't control others. It controls your response to them. And in that control, there is freedom. A mind like that doesn't need applause. It doesn't need reassurance. It doesn't even need to be understood. It just needs to be aligned with truth, with purpose, with something deeper than the moment. And once you build that alignment, you'll start to see things for what they are, not what you hoped they would be. That clarity may cost you relationships, opportunities, comfort, but it will give you something far more valuable: consistency, direction, inner power. And as that power grows, you begin to move differently, not faster, not louder, just with more precision. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself to everyone. You choose where your energy goes. You become less accessible to drama and more available to purpose. You let go of the need to be liked and embrace the freedom to be real. And with every boundary held, your mind becomes quieter, your heart becomes lighter, your path becomes clearer. That's the fortress. It's not a wall that keeps the world out. It's a foundation that keeps your strength in. It doesn't make you hard, it makes you whole. It doesn't make you distant, it makes you discerning. And when the storms come, as they always do, you don't fall apart, you don't break, you remain still, clear, untouched. Not because nothing tried to shake you, but because you finally built something that nothing could move. Betrayal doesn't begin with a knife. It begins with trust, with comfort, with the soft moments where your guard is down and you believe, just for a second, that someone sees you and would never harm you. That illusion is the real danger, because betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It doesn't shout from a distance. It whispers from the seat beside you, from the friend you called family, from the colleague you mentored, from the one who knew the way in, not by force, but by invitation. And once you've been betrayed not once, but several times, you start to realize something that cuts deeper than any act itself. Betrayal is a pattern, not a surprise. It's not always malicious. Sometimes it's born of weakness, of jealousy, of desperation. But the outcome is always the same. You're left holding the broken pieces of something you thought was solid. And the instinct is to ask why, to replay every conversation, to blame yourself for not seeing it coming. But the truth is, the clues were always there, subtle, overlooked, dismissed in the name of friendship. That's how betrayal always works. It hides behind familiarity. It blends in with loyalty until the moment it doesn't. And by the time you realize it, it's already done its damage. You learn quickly that closeness isn't the same as alignment. That just because someone walks with you doesn't mean they're walking for the same reasons. Some walk beside you because they believe in where you're going. Others walk beside you to see how far they can follow before they push you off the path and take your place. And it's painful, not just because of the loss, but because of the clarity it forces on you. You begin to see the small ways you ignored your instincts, the tiny moments you brushed off their envy, the times you thought they'd never do that to me, only to find out they already were. And here's where most people go wrong. They become cynical. They shut everyone out. They let betrayal harden them into suspicion. But the wiser path isn't isolation. It's discernment. It's learning to observe without always reacting, to listen between the lines, to trust, not blindly but with awareness, because you don't need to expect betrayal from everyone. You just need to stop being surprised when it comes from someone you once let close. The Stoics never told us to expect perfection. They told us to expect human nature, and human nature left unchecked will always serve itself first. Seneca once said, "The man who has anticipated the coming of troubles takes away their power when they arrive." And that's what this awareness gives you. Not bitterness, but strength. Not fear, but foresight. You stop handing out keys to your heart just because someone smiles. You stop sharing your deepest plans with people who haven't proven they know how to hold your silence with respect. You stop offering loyalty in advance and start letting time reveal who's really for you. What you start to notice is that betrayal always has a rhythm. It follows the same sequence: intimacy, comfort, subtle shifts, then the break. And if you pay attention, you'll catch the signs before the break happens. A certain look when you succeed, a subtle distance when you need support, a shift in language, less we, more me. It's not paranoia, it's pattern recognition. And the longer you live with clarity, the easier it is to see. But what makes betrayal so destructive isn't just the act. It's what it does to your belief in connection. It makes you question the good ones. It makes you hold back with people who've done nothing wrong. And if you're not careful, it poisons your view of loyalty altogether. That's why the fortress of the mind matters. That's why the filters you build aren't cold. They're necessary. Not because everyone is out to get you, but because not everyone is meant to go where you're going. And some people, even those you love, will try to sabotage you just to keep you close. Because your growth makes their stagnation unbearable. There's a quiet violence in betrayal that doesn't come from anger. It comes from comfort. The person who betrays you doesn't do it with malice in their eyes. They do it with the belief that you'll recover, that you'll understand, that they had no choice. They justify it. They reframe the story in their favor. And that's what makes it sting. The absence of accountability. The betrayal is compounded by the fact that they believe they're still the victim. But you don't have to carry that weight. You don't have to seek justice from the person who fractured your trust. You don't have to win the argument or even confront them. You just have to decide, this chapter ends here. No more energy, no more access, no more wondering if it could have been different, because it wasn't. And the only way forward is forward, without them. Carl Jung once observed that shame is a soul-eating emotion, and betrayal often carries shame, not just for what they did, but for what you didn't see. You blame yourself, you feel foolish, exposed. But shame is only powerful when it goes unexamined. The moment you step back and see betrayal for what it is, not a sign of your weakness, but a lesson in clarity, you begin to take back your strength. You don't become harder, you become wiser, sharper, more tuned into the silent language people speak when you're not watching. Eventually, you'll be grateful, not for the pain, but for the precision it gave you, for the way it taught you to protect your peace without apology, for how it carved a line between those who say they're loyal and those who show it. You'll see that every betrayal was a kind of brutal grace, stripping away the illusions you clung to, exposing the cracks in your foundation, and giving you the chance to rebuild, not with bitterness, but with discernment. And that discernment becomes your strength. You stop explaining your choices. You stop oversharing your dreams. You let people earn the right to stand beside you, not through words, but through consistency, through presence, through how they act when you're not useful to them. That's how you know. Not when things are good, not when the path is easy, but when silence falls, when your back is turned, when your light threatens to outshine theirs. So you become intentional. You keep your circle small, not because you're afraid, but because you've seen what happens when it's too wide. You speak less, not because you lack trust, but because you've learned the value of holding some truths for yourself. You expect less, not because you're jaded, but because you're done giving more than people are willing to give back. And through it all, you hold your center. You don't let betrayal define you. You let it refine you into someone who walks with a quiet strength, who loves with boundaries, who leads with clarity, and who never forgets. The people who are closest to you will always carry the greatest power to hurt you, which is why your greatest power must be knowing exactly who and what is worth the risk. Trust feels simple when you're young. You give it without hesitation, assuming that if your intentions are good, theirs must be too. You share, you open up, you believe. And for a while, that innocence feels like strength. It creates bonds, it builds warmth, it makes the world feel safe. But safety built on assumption is fragile. Eventually, life teaches you that trust is not a gift you hand out freely. It's a currency, one of the rarest. And every time it's spent in the wrong place, it costs you more than you thought it would. That's the lesson most people learn too late. That trust, once given freely, becomes a calculated risk. The higher you climb in life, emotionally, professionally, spiritually, the more that risk increases, because now your decisions carry weight, your words echo further, your vulnerabilities, once harmless, now become tools in someone else's hands if they choose to misuse them. And while it doesn't mean you stop trusting, it means you start choosing carefully, not with fear, but with awareness, not from paranoia, but from pattern recognition. You begin to understand that trust isn't something you owe anyone. It's something they earn, slowly, consistently, and not just once, but over time, through action. There's a kind of grief in that realization, because it means letting go of the idea that you can fully relax in every room, that you can be fully seen by every person who claims to care. It means that even the people closest to you have limits, and that proximity doesn't equal loyalty. That truth stings at first, but it also sharpens you. You stop mistaking charisma for character, stop equating shared history with shared intention, and most importantly, you stop confusing kindness with alignment. To be powerful is to be deliberate, not defensive, not closed off, just intentional. You understand that trust isn't just about what someone says, it's about what they do when it's inconvenient for them, when no one is watching, when they have nothing to gain. That's the test most people fail, not because they're evil, but because they haven't done the work to hold someone else's trust with care. And trust, when placed in unsteady hands, doesn't just break, it backfires. This is why the wise grow quieter, why they speak less, share less, move more in silence. Not because they've lost faith in people, but because they've found peace in being selective. They've learned that some people want your trust not to honor it, but to access you, to use it as leverage, as proof of closeness they haven't really earned. And when you've been burned enough times, you stop letting words convince you. You start looking for consistency, and not just in how someone treats you, but in how they treat people who can do nothing for them. Aristotle once said, "We are what we repeatedly do." And in the realm of trust, that means you pay attention not to grand gestures, but to repeated behavior, to how someone shows up when you're silent, to how they speak about others behind closed doors, to whether they protect what you share when you're not in the room. Trust, then, becomes less about the stories people tell and more about the patterns they reveal. This shift changes your relationships. It doesn't make them colder, it makes them clearer. You no longer feel the need to be fully understood by everyone. You stop offering your inner world like a gift to anyone who asks. You start holding it with reverence, because you realize that the more sacred something is, the fewer hands it belongs in. And your thoughts, your doubts, your dreams, those are sacred. Not because they're perfect, but because they're yours. There's a kind of strength that comes from keeping certain things for yourself. Not out of secrecy, but out of self-respect. You realize that not every insight needs to be spoken, not every plan needs to be shared, and not every feeling needs to be validated. The powerful don't hide, they refine. They withhold not out of fear, but out of discipline. They know that once trust leaves your hands, it belongs to someone else. And not everyone is worthy of that responsibility. But this doesn't mean you become cynical. It means you become calibrated. You still love, but you love wisely. You still connect, but with boundaries. You still open up, but only to those who have shown that they know how to carry what you hand them. And even then you watch, not with suspicion, but with awareness. Because trust, when given too quickly, turns into a liability. But when given with discernment, it becomes a bridge that strengthens both sides. Carl Jung believed that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. And transformation requires integrity. It requires presence. It requires the willingness to hold another person's truth without twisting it, leaking it, or using it as a mirror of your own insecurities. Most people aren't ready for that kind of responsibility, and that's okay. But once you see that clearly, you stop expecting it. And in that release, you reclaim your power. You begin to notice the spaces where your trust has been stretched too thin, where you've over-explained yourself, overexposed yourself, where you've given people access to places within you that they hadn't earned. And slowly, you begin to seal those doors. Not with anger, but with grace. Because you're not punishing anyone, you're protecting what matters, your focus, your peace, your vision. And what's beautiful is that the more selective you become, the more honest your life becomes. The relationships that remain are stronger. The conversations are deeper. The silence is richer. You don't need to perform. You don't need to convince. You just exist, fully, without defense. Because you've learned to trust yourself first. And that's the trust that matters most. Once you hold that, everything else becomes easier to navigate. The world doesn't need more open books. It needs more wise authors, people who know which pages to share and which ones to keep close. People who understand that trust is not a transaction, it's a bond. And bonds, when formed without care, become chains. But when formed with intention, they become anchors. So yes, trust is a risk, always. But now it's a risk you measure, a gift you protect, a language you speak with precision, not impulse. And in that precision, you find something the reckless never will: peace. Peace in knowing that what's shared is respected, what's held is safe, and what's built is solid. You don't have to be suspicious of everyone, just awake, just grounded enough to see clearly, to trust wisely, and to never again hand over your power disguised as vulnerability to someone who hasn't proven they know what to do with it. That's not caution, that's wisdom, and wisdom is the currency of the truly powerful. Clarity isn't something you stumble into, it's something you make room for. And more often than not, that room begins with distance. Not emotional detachment in the cold, indifferent sense, but distance in the way a painter steps back to see the whole canvas. You can't understand a situation while you're still wrapped in its emotion. You can't make sharp decisions when your vision is fogged by closeness, comfort, or urgency. That's why the ones who lead well, think well, and live well are often misunderstood as distant. But distance isn't rejection, it's reflection. There's a quiet kind of power in learning how to step back, to not jump at every emotion, to not react to every tone in someone's voice or every shift in someone's behavior. When you're close to everything, too close, you become reactive. You start seeing threats where there are none. You start projecting fears instead of identifying facts. And that's how chaos enters. Not because the world got louder, but because your inner world stopped filtering the noise. The Stoics knew this. They didn't talk about control as domination. They spoke of it as inner command. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." But bravery isn't charging in. Bravery is knowing when to hold back. Holding back is harder than acting. It requires more strength to pause than to speak, more clarity to observe than to intervene. But this is the foundation of real power, not performance, but precision. When you operate from clarity, you don't need to control others. You control the one thing that truly matters, yourself. And when you can do that, your environment stops becoming a battlefield and becomes a space for strategic movement. You start to respond instead of react. You move with timing instead of impulse. You see patterns instead of just people. That shift changes everything. Suddenly, you're no longer sucked into every conflict, every invitation to drama, every emotional wave. You recognize that peace isn't found by avoiding problems, but by standing still within them. Distance gives you that stillness. It's the space between emotion and action where your real power grows. Because once you've paused, once you've breathed, once you've removed yourself from the immediate pressure, you can actually see not just what's happening, but why it's happening, and more importantly, how to move through it without losing yourself. Clarity isn't always comfortable. It will ask you to acknowledge things you'd rather avoid. It will reveal truths about people you care about, decisions you've made, and patterns you've repeated. But without that clarity, you're just surviving. And survival without insight becomes a loop, a cycle of reaction, regret, reset. Distance breaks that cycle. It slows you down just enough to notice the choice before the mistake. That's the kind of control most people never reach. Because most people are still trying to control the world instead of their perception of it. If your inner voice is always drowned out by the expectations, judgments, and demands of others, you're not really living your life. You're performing someone else's version of it. And performance is exhausting. It's not sustainable. It's also not strategic. Clarity allows you to choose where your energy goes. You no longer feel the need to attend every argument you're invited to. You don't jump to fix every problem, explain every decision, or justify every change. You begin to understand that most noise is not an emergency. It's just distraction. And when you live in distraction long enough, confusion becomes your default. You start doubting what you already know. You start second-guessing your intuition. You start asking questions you've already answered just because someone else doesn't like your answer. Distance is how you take that power back. Not by withdrawing from the world entirely, but by withdrawing your urgency to be understood by it. You're not to be available to everyone's emotions. You're not here to carry the weight of every room you walk into. You're here to move with clarity, to see what's yours to carry and what isn't, to discern when to speak and when silence is the wiser choice. As you step into this way of living, something subtle shifts in how you experience conflict. You stop seeing it as something to fix and start seeing it as information. Not everything needs resolution. Some things just need space. Some people just need time. And some problems aren't yours to solve. That kind of clarity protects your energy. It protects your time. It keeps you aligned with your direction, not distracted by detours that don't lead anywhere worth going. This is the difference between movement and momentum. Anyone can be busy. Anyone can make noise. But those who move with purpose, who act with intention, who build with vision, they do so from a place of inner stillness. And stillness can only be accessed when you step away from the pull of emotional chaos. When you give yourself enough distance to remember what matters and what's just noise. The more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. You'll find yourself responding slower, but with more weight. You'll feel the urge to speak and choose silence instead. You'll notice patterns in others you used to miss. You'll see opportunities before they arrive and threats before they're fully formed, because distance gives you foresight. And foresight isn't magic. It's just the reward of patience. You won't always get it right. Sometimes you'll still act on emotion, still get pulled into the storm, still say something you regret or move too fast. But even then, the distance you've trained yourself to hold will shorten the damage. You'll recover faster. You'll return to center with less friction, because the mind that's practiced in clarity doesn't stay lost for long. And as this clarity deepens, you'll notice another change. You stop explaining yourself. You stop needing to. You understand that clarity doesn't need validation. It doesn't beg to be understood. It simply stands, unshaken. And in that stillness, you become a mirror. The people around you will feel it. Some will be drawn to it. Others will be unnerved by it. But either way, they will respect it. Because the world respects what it cannot shake. That's the power of distance. It's not isolation, it's alignment. It's not detachment, it's discernment. It's the space where you remember who you are without the world constantly trying to tell you who you should be. It's where you refine your focus, strengthen your boundaries, and reclaim your voice. In that space, control becomes simple, not because you dominate everything around you, but because you've mastered the only thing you ever needed to, yourself. And from that mastery, clarity flows, quietly, relentlessly, without force, without noise, just presence, just power, just peace. Most people see leadership as a performance, a role you step into once others decide you're ready, a set of traits, charisma, confidence, command, that suddenly appear the moment the spotlight hits. But real leadership doesn't begin when the world starts listening. It begins long before that, in the silence, in the moments when no one's watching, when there's no applause, no confirmation, no one telling you you're on the right path. That's when the mask of leadership is forged, not as a deception, but as a layer of resilience. Not something to hide behind, but something that holds you together when everything around you is uncertain. You don't just wake up one day and lead. You build yourself into someone who can hold that weight. And that building happens privately, in doubt, in frustration, in decisions you have to make without consensus or validation. The first person you have to convince is yourself. Not with words, but with action, with consistency, with your ability to keep going when everything inside you wants to give up. Leadership is tested most in the absence of recognition, when there's no one to tell you that you're doing well, and yet you move forward anyway. What many don't realize is that strength in leadership is rarely loud. It doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need to dominate a room. Often, it just stands still, not because it doesn't feel the pressure, but because it's learned not to be ruled by it. The people who lead with quiet strength have already fought their biggest battles, not in public, but in private. They've wrestled with doubt in empty rooms. They've sat with failure when no one else knew they were breaking. And through that process, they built something unshakable inside. Something that doesn't flinch when the world turns cold. You begin to understand that leadership is less about being followed and more about being rooted, about knowing who you are when everything familiar is gone, when those who once supported you change direction, when the outcome is unclear and the pressure mounts. That's when the inner voice has to be louder than the noise. Not louder in volume, but louder in conviction. The kind of conviction that isn't dependent on results or praise. The kind that lives in the actions you take when doubt is screaming in your ear. Carl Jung once said, "The world will ask you who you are, and if you don't know, it will tell you." That is the essence of private leadership. Knowing yourself before the world tries to define you. Building your foundation so strong that you don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You don't need to prove your worth. You just embody it. And that embodiment comes through 1,000 quiet choices. The choice to get up when it's easier to stay down. The choice to act with integrity when compromise would be more convenient. The choice to remain steady when everything inside you feels unstable. When you lead from that place, you stop needing to be the loudest in the room. You stop needing to explain your every move. You realize that power isn't in the display, it's in the discipline. And discipline doesn't grow in public. It grows in silence, in solitude, in the boring, relentless repetition of doing the right thing without anyone noticing. Most people won't see it. They'll only see the outcome, the title, the speech, the presence. But those are just the surface. The real weight is carried in private, long before the world decides to listen. It's in those private moments that the mask becomes necessary, not as a lie, but as a structure. A way of keeping yourself focused when the emotions rise. A tool to keep your doubt from leaking into your decisions. It's not about hiding who you are. It's about protecting what you've built from being shaken by every breeze. Because the truth is, even when you're strong, you're not immune to fear. You're not exempt from insecurity. You just don't let it dictate your next move. That's what the mask helps you do. Hold your ground long enough for clarity to return. And with time, that mask becomes less about hiding and more about honoring your responsibility. You're not just leading for yourself anymore. People look to you in crisis. They borrow your calm when they have none. They watch how you move, how you speak, how you carry pressure. And what they need most isn't perfection. They need steadiness. A sense that even if everything else is crumbling, you won't. Not because you have all the answers, but because you know how to move through chaos without becoming it. This is why the strongest leaders are often misunderstood. Their silence is mistaken for aloofness. Their restraint is seen as indifference. But those who've worn the mask long enough understand that real power isn't about reaction, it's about regulation. They don't rise and fall with every win or loss. They move with rhythm, not reactivity. And that rhythm was practiced long before anyone saw it. Even now, if you're building something, if you're trying to lead your own life with purpose, the hardest part will always be believing in yourself when there's no echo to reinforce your direction. When you're doubted. When your efforts are unseen. That's where you shape the version of you the world will later admire. Not on stage, not in spotlight, but in the dark, in the discipline, in the unwavering choice to keep going when no one claps. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself often that praise and criticism are both meaningless noise, that what matters most is living in accordance with your values, regardless of what others say. That principle anchors real leadership. Not popularity, not visibility, but alignment. The kind of alignment that lets you move through fire and remain composed, that allows you to lose people without losing yourself, that gives you the strength to carry others without collapsing. Eventually, the world may catch up. They may begin to see the strength you've been cultivating all along. They may recognize your resilience, your wisdom, your grace under pressure. But whether they do or not is secondary. Because the purpose of leadership isn't to be seen, it's to serve, to carry weight most people don't want, to make decisions that cost you comfort, and to do it all without needing recognition in return. So when you stand alone, when the path feels quiet and the burden feels heavy, remember this: you're not weak for wearing the mask. You're not inauthentic for protecting your peace. You're not fake for showing restraint when everything inside you feels like breaking. You're just leading, quietly, steadily, from a place the world rarely sees, but always feels. And if you've built yourself in the dark, with discipline, with intention, with clarity, then no matter how loud the world becomes, you'll never be moved by it. Because the strongest leaders never began with applause. They began with silence, with doubt, with solitude, and through it all, they became something few ever dare to be: unshakable. Solitude isn't about escaping the world, it's about returning to yourself. In a time where distractions are endless, being alone with your own thoughts is often viewed as uncomfortable, even dangerous. But the truth is, the discomfort we feel in solitude isn't because we're alone. It's because we're finally facing what's inside. The noise we try to drown out with conversations, entertainment, and obligations, that noise is often coming from within. And in solitude, there's no one left to blame, no one to validate, no one to perform for. It's just you and what you've avoided. That's why so many run from it. But the powerful, they walk toward it. To be fully present with yourself is one of the rarest forms of courage. Because there's no mask to wear when no one is watching. There's no role to play. What's left is the raw material, the insecurities, the fears, the doubts, and the responsibility to sort through them. This is where refinement begins. This is where clarity is born. When you give yourself permission to sit in stillness, to ask uncomfortable questions without flinching, you start to realize that solitude isn't a punishment. It's a tool, a mirror, and often the only place where truth has room to rise. The world rewards those who are loud, busy, and constantly seen, but wisdom grows in the unseen moments. The real decisions, the ones that change your life, are rarely made in crowded rooms. They're made in quiet reflection. That's the paradox. The people who seem to move the world are often the ones who spend the most time away from it. Alone, not because they hate people, but because they know power comes from understanding their own mind before being influenced by others. There's a kind of strength that only silence can build. When you stop needing the presence of others to feel valuable, everything changes. It's not that relationships or connections become meaningless, they become clearer. You stop chasing people who were never meant to stay. You stop bending to please crowds that don't care. And instead, you begin to attract those who recognize the stillness in you. People are drawn to those who don't need them to feel whole. That's what makes solitude magnetic. It reveals the difference between attachment and connection. The most powerful decisions are often made in solitude. The quiet choice to walk away, the difficult decision to let go, the moment of clarity that changes the entire direction of your life. These things rarely happen in chaos. They require space and the ability to hear your own voice without it being drowned by the opinions of the world. When you learn to retreat into yourself not as an escape, but as a practice, you begin to uncover a version of you that doesn't rely on approval, a version that knows, that listens, that leads. And awakening doesn't come from being surrounded, it comes from being still, from noticing your thoughts without judgment, from facing what's been buried beneath your constant motion, from accepting that growth often begins where comfort ends. Solitude is the place where you meet your future self, not the version shaped by noise, but the one forged in silence. People often confuse being alone with being lonely, but they're not the same. Loneliness is the ache for something outside of you. Solitude is the comfort in knowing you have everything you need within. When you start to feel at home in your own mind, external validation loses its grip. You don't chase attention because you're already seen by the one who matters most, you. You don't beg for love because you've given it to yourself first. And from that fullness, everything else becomes a choice, not a need. You begin to notice how the quiet reorganizes your thoughts, how it reveals what actually matters. You see the patterns that used to control you, the stories you've told yourself, the roles you've played, and slowly you start to rewrite them. In solitude, you don't just think, you evolve. You step away from who the world told you to be and return to who you were before it all got noisy. You shed layers that never belonged to you. And what remains is honest, clear, powerful. The ability to be alone and still feel whole is a superpower. In a world obsessed with connection, the person who is content in their own company holds the upper hand. They aren't moved by gossip. They don't shrink under pressure. They respond rather than react. They carry a calmness that can't be faked, because it was built in the dark, sharpened in the silence, and proven in the moments when no one was watching. You'll find that solitude doesn't make you harder. It makes you wiser. You become more intentional with your words, more aware of your energy, more protective of your peace. You stop offering explanations to people who were never listening. You stop proving yourself to those who doubted you. And instead, you live. Quietly, deliberately, authentically. Because once you've tasted the clarity of solitude, the noise of the world becomes optional. Marcus Aurelius said it best. Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. That retreat is always there, waiting, not for the perfect moment, not for permission, but for you to choose it, to step away from the endless noise and return to the source, yourself. Because no matter where life takes you, your most powerful ally will always be the part of you that can sit in silence and still stand tall. So the next time the world feels overwhelming, don't run toward more noise. Don't fill your time with what's easy. Step back, be still, listen, not to the world, but to the quiet voice inside you that knows who you are. That voice may be soft, but it's never wrong. It's the compass in the chaos, the foundation under pressure, the strength that no one sees but everyone eventually feels. You don't need a crowd to be complete. You need clarity, and clarity often.
One hour na pala. Thank you for watching.